Order. We now come to the debate on the contribution of faith organisations to the voluntary sector in local communities. To move the motion, I call Fiona Bruce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Christians possess a rich heritage of social reform and charitable care, which is alive today. In the 19th century, William Wilberforce and Lord Shaftesbury led campaigns for the abolition of slavery and child labour, and others such as Bernardo and William Catherine Booth were involved in founding charitable organisations covering every conceivable form of human need as an expression of Christian love. And those Christian principles that drove Williams and Wilberforce and Shaftesbury are still very much alive in Britain today and as relevant as ever. The Evangelical Alliance, the largest and oldest body representing Christians in the UK, evangelical Christians that is, estimates that there are over 2 million evangelicals in the UK. This is an increasingly diverse constituency with 500,000 black majority Christians and more widely over 1 million British Christians in the UK from black, Asian and other minority ethnic communities. To clarify, I'm speaking now mainly about the contribution of Christian communities, since those are the ones I know best. I'm sure that other honourable members will speak of the contribution of other faiths to our local communities. The 2014 National Church and Social Action Survey listed the top 10 activities of churches sampled as food distribution, parents and toddlers groups, school assemblies and RE work, festivals and fun days, children's clubs up to age 11, caring for the elderly, debt counselling, youth work aged 12 to 18, cafes open to the public and marriage counselling courses. Every one of these takes place in my constituency, most multiple times, and the tremendous work done by church members in my constituency is, I'm sure, representative of what takes place across this country. And often, in the toughest and most challenging situations and areas, street pastors at night, helping the homeless, addiction support, job clubs, particularly successful in my own constituency at New Life Church, helping victims of human trafficking, supporting children with special needs, prison visiting, literacy projects, fostering and adoption support, getting alongside those with mental health problems. The value... I will, of course.
I'm very grateful, and I absolutely agree to it. But to add to her list, over Christmas when we had the terrible floods in Yorkshire, some of the people who helped the most in our communities were some of the faith-based organisations. If I particularly mention the Salvation Army and actually the mosques in Bradford who came over to my constituency to help with the clear-up operation. So they play a vital role in when there's an emergency like flooding as well.
The honourable member is quite right, and indeed the Brethren also play a vital role in disaster relief support. So the value of these activities is vast to society. They represent a glue which holds together the fabric of our communities, particularly in many needy places. Indeed, I've heard it said that youth work in this country would literally collapse without the church's involvement. Toddlers might miss out on the developmental benefits of playing with others of a vital age. And their mothers in particular, young mums, would miss out on the relationship building and support they facilitate. Cafes provide not only nutritious, wholesome and economical meals in pleasant surroundings, but also a place for the vulnerable, the lonely and the low, with a listening ear. Marriage counselling services invest in families and stable homes, which we know bring massive benefits to society in terms of the child's mental health and educational attainment, and which we know, when things go wrong, are of great emotional cost to families and to society. In fact, the Marriage Foundation have estimated that the cost of family breakdown is greater than the entire defence budget, which shows the invaluable contribution which strengthening family life can make in our society. Caring for the elderly. We know what a strain our social services are under, caring for an ageing population and providing them with dignity when families are often at a distance. And it is so often the church that fills the gap when things perhaps don't work out as intended. Faith-based organisations and charities often go the extra mile, ensuring someone is seen, remembered and reassured. And they often provide bereavement support too. And debt counselling, faith groups and churches are doing vital work in this area, helping individuals to best manage their finances. We know the cost of spiralling debt can lead to family breakdown, emotional heartache and misery for many. And in this respect, I do commend the work of Christians Against Poverty, who work with the whole person to provide a range of services for those in debt without any public funding, and were recently awarded Debt Advice Provider of the Year at an industry award. Indeed, with reference to public funding, I believe I can confidently say that most of these services are provided without public funding, and where it is obtained, the value for money of that use is outstanding. Speaking for a moment in monetary terms, a recent report by the Cinnamon Network, the Cinnamon Faith Action Audit, estimates that collectively the Church provides over £3 billion of social support to UK society. The same report found that faith groups deliver 220,000 social action projects, that local faith groups serve 48 million beneficiaries, and that local faith groups mobilise 2 million volunteers. The Church may not be perfect, but without her, society would certainly notice the difference. Now, research by the Evangelical Alliance found that 81% of evangelical Christians do some form of voluntary work, serving in the wider community with their church at least once a year. 37% do so at least once a week. At the recent mayoral hustings in London for churches, Church of England was quoted as having 3 times as many outlets in the capital as Starbucks. And Zach Goldsmith said in his remarks at the end of a debate, "The Evangelical Alliance is part of the big society on the front line tackling crime, on the front line tackling homelessness, and so many other of the challenges London is facing." That is so true, and we've seen other quotes from other individuals and organisations, which I will refer to now, including from the Prime Minister, who says, "I am an unapologetic supporter of the role of faith in this country. Across the country, we have tens of thousands of fantastic faith-based charities. Every day they're performing minor miracles in local communities. As Prime Minister, I've worked hard to stand up for these charities and give them more power and support. If my party continues in government, it's our ambition to do even more." And I was very pleased indeed to hear that. Similarly, several local authorities have also spoken positively of the contribution which church groups play in our local communities. Many of them speaking of the fact that they are very closely embedded within the communities, that they are close to the grassroots of their communities, that there is a continuing involvement in local communities, which is so important. Today is an election day. Political parties will come and go in terms of their authority in our communities, but the churches will be there enduring this century as they did last century and for centuries before. And that's why it's so important that we support them in the way that we need to do.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I certainly shall.
Will my honourable friend accept that they are the unsung heroes of society who day in, day out, selflessly look after help within our communities, not looking for any thanks whatsoever, but the satisfaction of being able to help people less fortunate than ourselves?
I absolutely do agree, and I thank the honourable member for that, right honourable member for that intervention. Churches across the country are not just buildings that bring people together. They're made up of people of all ages, of all political persuasions, well off and not so well off, compelled by compassion, who, often alongside the most vulnerable on our streets and estates, work day in and day out to support our local communities. Local authorities, however, could do well to improve their understanding of what faith groups do and the way that they work. I believe that this has improved over recent years, but I still think there is more that could be done. In the last Parliament, the All-Party Parliamentary Christian Group produced a report which talked about this, and some of the recommendations within that report still stand today. Local authorities perhaps sometimes have, perhaps, for want of a better word, a concern about the motivation of faith groups. Whilst faith groups themselves often have a limited understanding of how local government works and the language required to engage with it, guidance from central government as to how to improve these relations, how to improve religious literacy on the part of all of us working in our local communities would help here. Steps should be taken to help us all understand the diversity of beliefs in today's United Kingdom, a key factor in strengthening civil society and promoting community cohesion, stability and resilience. So too would an approach by local authorities to provide what has been termed reasonable accommodation of religion and belief wherever possible. Faith groups don't expect funding for what is called often proselytisation, but they do ask to be free to be open about their beliefs and values. And so, for example, if a conversation naturally starts during their voluntary work, it's not unreasonable that perhaps they should be allowed to continue it, particularly if initiated by those who they are helping. It is, after all, their faith which motivates religious people to work in the first place in their local communities. So an approach should be adopted which allows faith groups to be open about their beliefs and values and the practices which these encourage, rather than promoting a privatisation of belief. This would provide for authentic religious expression. And can I just at this point mention that there is a very key concern on the part of many Christians in particular about their religious liberty and freedom of expression. The Evangelical Alliance ran a poll not so long ago, and 97% of those who responded said that policies which ensure religious liberty and freedom of expression were important to them. Indeed, 71% of them, that's 1.3 million people, said it would affect their vote, which is actually almost an election-shifting number of voters. It was, of all the concerns that were highlighted in this poll, the one which mattered most to them, even above issues such as euthanasia or policies to reduce the availability of pornography. Policies which ensure religious liberty and freedom of expression were considered the most important, and I think that is something which the government would do well to note. Many of the recommendations which were contained in the Christians in Parliament report, which was called Faith in the Community, produced in 2013, as I say, still remain true today, and only last week another report produced by the Oasis Foundation was published, Faith in Public Service, the Role of the Church in Public Service Delivery. Time prohibits me from quoting from this report in as much detail as I would like to, but I do want to quote from one or two sections, if I may. First of all, the report says, local authorities have yet to grasp the opportunities for engagement with the voluntary sector, and I think this very much goes to the work of the churches, which is what this report is highlighting. It says the church possesses an unparalleled reach and volunteer membership, a sense of place both in terms of physical presence and a bridge into local communities, a traditional and largely accepted role in community cohesion and regeneration, and the ability to deliver locally specific integrated services tailored to individual needs with both personality and precision. These strengths have enabled individual churches around the country to engage confidently in the delivery of projects, important projects that have benefited their local communities. A research commissioned for this report finds that churches feel confident in that delivery, and the public feels confident in their competency and the abilities of church groups to deliver those services. And I do want to pay tribute at this point to the work of organisations like the Cinnamon Network, the Street Pastors and the Trussell Trust, and Christians Against Poverty. All have been extremely important in encouraging that level of confidence as they have rolled out programmes which churches have been able to adopt, knowing that they will be successful and effective. But this report goes on to say there still remains a perception on the part of local authorities and the public that faith organisations will be conditional in who they deliver services to, and that they will seek to proselytise. That fear is more one of perception than reality. And so I do ask that ministers look at how we can get the balance right and ensure that there is this freedom of religion which is so yearned for by people of faith, whilst at the same time ensuring that local church groups can be confident that they can engage with the local authority and that their expression of their faith will be accepted, understood and able to be exhibited freely. There is more that we can all do. I'd like, if I may, in closing, just to mention one last point. It's a particular policy. It concerns a great many organisations and volunteers in this area. And that's the proposal, consulted on a few months ago, to have Ofsted inspectors regulate and inspect out-of-school activity for young people, which adds up to more than 6 hours a week. Now, the school minister in a debate in this place earlier this year told us that over 10,000 responses had come in on those proposals, despite the consultation falling over a Christmas period. And those proposals would mean that a Christian youth group, which for example plays sport or games one day a week or meets one evening to discuss their faith, plus perhaps on a Sunday, could have Ofsted inspectors coming to see if their activities are compatible with a list of British values drawn up by the government to check whether or not they are extremist. Could any of the types of work I have described today on the face of it be described as extremist? Actually, perhaps yes, in their love, care and concern for the most vulnerable and needy in our society. But Mr. Speaker, I submit to you that there is nothing less British than the government restricting the expression of religious faith based on an arbitrary set of values drawn up in Whitehall. It is the very opposite of what I understand conservatism to be. Ofsted inspectors will likely not be looking for illegal activities. They'll be looking for activities which fit into a vaguely defined list of sentiments, such as non-violent extremism, criticised only yesterday at the Joint Human Rights Committee of both houses, which I sit on, as being an impossibly vague definition. It isn't clear what the list of British values actually is. There have been countless statements of it by government ministers, including the Prime Minister, and a number of uses of it in regulation. If government doesn't have a clear idea of what these values are, how could anyone else have them? And as we in this House should well be aware, vague laws and vague policies are a breeding ground for abuse and misapplication. There is grave concern on the part of many, many Christians across the country about these proposals, and rightly so. Again, just yesterday at the Joint Human Rights Committee, one witness told us these proposals could deter volunteerism. This is not the first time by any means we've heard this expressed, including on the part of many faith organisations. Many small, immensely valuable initiatives are concerned, out of fear they might say the wrong word, or that their words or phrases might be misinterpreted, that they will come under unfair scrutiny from inspectors whose job is to inspect schools. I shall.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. Would she also agree with me that one of the concerns is with regard to teachers, who many of the volunteers who work in these Sunday schools and other youth works are teachers, and they're afraid about the damage to their professional reputation by an Ofsted inspection, and therefore they may well withdraw, which would be hugely damaging to all of these organisations.
I entirely agree that they're concerned, actually, about their professional reputations and even their very jobs. Ofsted are there to inspect education standards in schools, not to make ideological judgments about church youth groups or any other voluntary initiatives. Professor Julian Rivers, also in his evidence to the Joint Human Rights Committee, has told us he is concerned that this proposal may well be in breach of the European Convention on Human Rights, as registration, merely the registration, not even the inspection, would restrict the free exercise of religion. A joint statement made last month by several national organisations representing millions of Christians said about the proposals, the scope for vexatious complaints is considerable, especially in the current climate of aggressive secularism and religious illiteracy, something I mentioned earlier. Whilst Christians wholeheartedly support reasonable measures to prevent terrorism and violent extremism, these proposals will lead to a loss of civil liberties and create a large bureaucracy that will divert resources away from restraining extremists who reject UK law. Such individuals will simply ignore or effortlessly circumvent the registration requirements. We urge the government to drop these proposals and develop a targeted, intelligence-led approach that will genuinely inhibit the activities of violent extremists. I do ask that the Minister consider this, and perhaps not in this debate, but later supply a response to these concerns. And can I, in closing, give the example of one organisation concerned about these proposals? Christian Camping International UK provides in excess of 30,000 children and young people with over 500 events across more than 250 venues. They are experts in this sector. And I know how my own boys have benefited from camping holidays with faith groups. But they list a number of potential unintended consequences of these proposals. They say much of the activity referred to is dependent on a large number of volunteers. This is their activity. Finding volunteers is a constant issue, and the government should be aware that increasing the level of bureaucracy involved in providing such events will only exacerbate the difficulty. They point out they are already regulated in a number of ways, including by charity law and regulation through DBS and safeguarding checks. They say there are no examples of such Christian ministries in the UK teaching extremism, nor encouraging young people to celebrate terrorism or become terrorists. The proposals have the potential both to overload the sector with more costs and red tape. The government seems to radically underestimate this. So I would ask that ministers provide a response to this. I believe the government has begun to row back on some of the proposals put out in the consultation document. Earlier this year, the Schools Minister said that one-off residential activities wouldn't be included, and we've had an indication that Sunday schools themselves wouldn't be included. But whilst I welcome these intentions, can I point out again to the government that there are severe issues with this proposal which run far deeper than these few qualifications can address?
The Honourable Lady concluded her speech.
I'm conscious, Mr Speaker, that it is important that I do not take more than a fair amount of time. And so there is much more I could say on this issue, but I believe I've made the important points.
Thank you. The question is as on the order paper. I'm merely asking. The question is as on the order paper. Mr Stephen Timms.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Let me start by congratulating the Honourable Member for Congleton on securing this debate. She certainly kept the Backbench Business Committee busy in recent weeks and to great effect, not least on this occasion. And I agree with everything that she's just said, including her very apposite criticism of the government proposal, in effect, to turn Ofsted into a state regulator of religion. I think that would be a dreadful thing to do, and I hope that her criticisms will be heeded by the Minister and that in due course that proposal will be abandoned. But, Mr Speaker, I hope this debate is going to achieve two things specifically. Firstly, I hope it's going to draw attention to the extraordinary scale and importance of the contributions to communities up and down the country being made by faith-based organisations, and the Honourable Member for Congleton set out very well the breadth of what's being done. But I also hope, Mr Speaker, that the debate will allow us to consider a specific proposal made by the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Faith and Society, which I chair, to ease the constraints that currently hold back faith-based organisations when they seek to work with national and particularly when they seek to work with local government. And I want to come and set out what that proposal is, and I hope the Minister will have the opportunity to respond to it. But, Mr Speaker, there is undoubtedly in Britain today a new movement of faith-based social activism. Its significance hasn't yet been fully understood or acknowledged, but at a time when some people argue that religious faith is on the way out, there's no doubt that this movement is, in fact, making a growing and immensely positive contribution to our society. I think that this movement is one of the most hopeful developments around. I chaired the advisory group for a report published in 2013 by the think tank Demos, called Exploring the Role of Faith in British society and politics. It's available on the Demos website. And one of the things the researchers did was to analyse the UK findings of the European Values Survey, a regular, highly regarded pan-European survey. And the analysis showed that about 1 in 8 people in Britain say, when they're asked, I belong to a religious organisation, and then Demos cross-tabulated that with participation in volunteering. And what the analysis showed was that people who say they belong to a religious organisation are far more likely to volunteer than others. But more than that, it showed that for quite a number of the types of volunteering that they examined, including volunteering for a trade union, volunteering on local community action, volunteering on women's issues, on international development and human rights, the 1 in 8 who belong to a religious organisation account for a larger number of volunteers than the whole of the 7 in 8 who don't. I think that's telling us something very important and perhaps quite surprising, for some even rather unsettling, about where the capacity to change things for the better in modern Britain can in reality be found. The most striking example, and it was mentioned by the Honourable Member for Congleton, has been the food bank phenomenon. If 10 years ago we had speculated about what would happen if tens of thousands of people were suddenly, following changes of government policy, unable to afford enough food for themselves and their families, I certainly would not have predicted that it was going to be the faith groups that would have stepped up to meet the need. But that is in fact what has happened. The 400 plus food banks organised by the Trussell Trust provided food for over 500,000 households over the past year. On average, I think just over 2 3-day emergency food supplies to each of them. And every single one of those food banks is based on a church. Islamic Relief has organised in a number of areas in the mosques to collect food in support of those food banks as well. And it's turned out in 21st century Britain that it has been the churches uniquely which have had both the motivation to tackle this problem, which has erupted so quickly, and perhaps more surprisingly than the motivation, they've also had the capacity and the resources to take it on. No one else has been able to. The faith groups have. And that tells us, again, something I think very important about the realities in Britain today and where the potential for changing things for the better resides. One striking example of this new movement that I've referred to of faith-based social activism, and a very distinctive element in the voluntary sector that we are reflecting on in this debate, is the organisation London Citizens. It's made up of churches, mosques, a synagogue, schools, trade union branches, community organisations, and it campaigns on issues which the members collectively agree are pressing in their community. For example, in favour of a living wage at a higher level than the statutory minimum wage, with the aim to make life easier for the lowest paid workers. And that initiative, the specific initiative that London Citizens took, lies behind the government's national living wage initiative. And their campaigning, and that's an example of it, has, I think, had a remarkable impact. And there is no doubt at all that the faith commitment of the Muslims and the Christians and others of faith involved in London Citizens has been key in their work. Last week, they gathered 6,000 people at the Copper Box on the Olympic Park for their accountability assembly with the 2 main candidates for today's elections for the Mayor of London. 4 years ago, Mr. Speaker, we established in the House the all-party parliamentary group on faith and society, which I chair. Its role is to support faith-based organisations in the contributions they're making to serve their communities, helping to make their contributions better understood, and where we can, to help remove some of the barriers which hold them back. The Secretariat for the all-party group is provided by Faith Action, which has a pioneering contract with the Department of Health, and I commend the leadership here that the Department of Health has provided in acknowledging and supporting the contribution of faith-based organisations. That contract that Faith Action holds is to enable them to support faith-based health initiatives. So the All-Party Parliamentary Group, after it was established, held a series of meetings with representatives of faith-based organisations. We had one meeting for organisations contributing to welfare to work, one on health and well-being, one on work with young people, recognising, and the Honourable Member for Congleton touched on this, that most youth work in Britain today is undertaken by faith groups, and one on international aid and development. So organisations we met included the Sikh Nishkam Centre in Birmingham about its work supporting unemployed people into jobs, the Muslim-led Faith Regen Foundation about its contribution to the government's work programme, the SPEAR programme based at St Paul's Church in Hammersmith, which is literally transforming the life chances of unemployed young people, the Institute Alternative School run by Lifeline Church in Dagenham, the Faith Relationships and Young People project based in my borough in Newham, with the Jewish Lads and Girls Brigade, with Hindu-led PPAL Care, that's P-E-E-P-A-L, PPAL Care, the Parish Nursing Initiative, and Jewish Care, which provides outstanding residential care. And for organisations that are focused overseas, we met with Siwa International, Hindu-led, with Christian Solidarity Worldwide, with Khalsa Aid, Sikh-led, and with Muslim Aid. And after we'd had all those discussions, 4 meetings, and reflected on what all the groups had said to us, a theme that emerged from the discussions was that many organisations experience a little bit of difficulty with their local authority. Often, I think, not so much with the members, with the councillors in local authorities, but with the officers, because council officers frequently, it seems to us, find it quite difficult to deal with faith. They are nervous that if they deal with one faith group, then they'll find themselves, in fairness, having to deal with all the others, and who knows what that might amount to. They're a bit uneasy anyway that the people involved in these groups are probably a little bit out of the ordinary. It kind of just feels to them, I think, like quite dangerous territory, which is probably easier to avoid altogether. Frankly, life would be much simpler if it wasn't necessary to deal with faith groups at all. More substantially, I think local authorities are nervous that if they were to commission services from faith groups, one of 2 things would be likely to go wrong. Either that public funds would be used to try and convert people instead of for delivering the service, or that there would be bias in delivering the service in favour of members of that faith group. Now, the evidence, insofar as there is evidence, is that neither of those things happens in practice. The Demos report touches on this, and let me just read its conclusion. It says, "We found little evidence to confirm critics' fears about faith group service providers, that their main motivation is proselytising. They are exclusivist and they discriminate. Rather, faithful providers," that's the term that Demos uses for them, "faithful providers are highly motivated and effective and often serve as the permanent and persistent pillars of community action within local communities. Faith appears to be an effective motivator for community service providers, akin to the notion of a public service ethos." I think that positive affirmation for what those groups are doing is correct. But of course, it is not inconceivable that one of those concerns felt by local authority officers might turn out to be well-founded in a particular case. It is not inconceivable that one of those problems could arise. So our all-party group decided to develop what we call a covenant. It was actually the suggestion of my right honourable friend, the member for Tottenham, that we should do this, in the hope of building trust on both sides, between local councils on the one side and the faith-based organisations in their area on the other. The text of that covenant is on the website of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Faith and Society. I just want to read the preamble to it, because I think that explains what our intention is. We say this: the coming decade will see the country facing new social needs and tough new challenges. There will be fresh demands on public health, social care, education, employment support and community inclusion. These challenges will require the identification of a new set of resources. We'll need to unlock the potential of every part of our society to contribute towards solutions. We believe that one important resource can be realised by supporting faith-based organisations to work with local authorities constructively and effectively as part of civil society. That will mean ensuring that local authorities are confident in commissioning services from and transferring assets to appropriately qualified faith-based organisations, and also that they include faith groups when they look for solutions to social needs. The All-Party Parliamentary Group on Faith and Society is convinced that faith groups have a great deal to offer as providers and advocates for the communities in which they serve, and that some of their potential is being unnecessarily overlooked at present. To help tackle the problem, the group has drafted a covenant which can be adopted by faith groups and local authorities in cities across the UK. Together, councils and faith communities should work out a local version of the commitment set out according to the priorities and needs of that locality. The covenant is a joint commitment between faith communities and local authorities to a set of principles that guide engagement, aiming to remove some of the mistrust that exists and to promote open, practical working on all levels. Yes, I'll gladly give one.
Thank the Honourable Member for giving way and for his work in the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Faith and Society, which he chairs, and for jointly securing this debate with me. He may not be aware, so I thought I might mention that this report published by the Oasis Foundation last week, Faith and Public Service, highly commends the work of the All-Party Group on Faith and Society and says of the importance of the covenant, that the covenant which the APPG has developed in partnership with Faith Action provides a framework in which faith organisations can make explicit commitments to good practice, not least in terms of inclusion, whilst having their faith identities fully respected. However, only a handful of local authorities have yet adopted the covenant's provisions, and it urges greater national urgency to drive forward this work, both from central government through the Local Government Association and through national church denominations, and argues that the church could develop even a national inclusion charter and kite mark based on the covenant in order that individual churches could signal to their local authorities and public the commitment to the inclusion of this. Does he agree with these recommendations?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for drawing attention to what the Oasis Trust has said. I was aware of it, and I very much appreciate what they've said, and I was going to refer to it myself in a few minutes. And I think it underlines the importance of progress being made in this area. But I was pleased that the first local authority to sign up to the covenant in December 2014 was the City of Birmingham, the biggest local authority in Europe. Like many local authorities, it faces an enormous challenge over the next few years. Indeed, I think it'd be true to say that all local authorities face an enormous challenge. Big cuts in spending are having to be made. And members of Birmingham City Council concluded, rightly in my view, that working with faith groups could be one way that would help them get through. They might commission some services from faith groups, perhaps transfer some assets and buildings to faith groups and ask them to run them. A variety of possibilities might be pursued. Our all-party parliamentary... If I dare to give way again.
I apologise for doing so, but can I commend an excellent initiative which Warrington Borough Council undertook with a group of people of faith when a local library was going to be closed. It was taken over by that group and is now running very successfully for the local community.
Well, I think a lot of those kind of things will have to be done if services are to be maintained. So our all-party group paid a visit to Birmingham. We went to the Central Mosque to the Central Synagogue. We took part in a round-table discussion at the really very remarkable, I think, Sikh Nishkam Centre in Birmingham, where an enormous number of things are being done. That discussion was hosted by the Bishop of Birmingham, David Urquhart, and the faith group leaders in Birmingham have been meeting regularly ever since 9/11, have got a very good relationship between one another, and I think this new partnership between the faith groups in the city and its civic leadership, signified by signing up to the covenant, is blazing a trail which others will want to follow. The covenant has since been signed by a number of other local authorities in Leeds, in Northamptonshire, in Barnet, in Solihull, and most recently in Calderdale. It's difficult, Mr. Speaker, in a debate like this to do anything more than just scratch the surface of what is being delivered. The Salvation Army that was mentioned by the Honourable Member for Shipley earlier on has been providing community services for 150 years, particularly to those who are vulnerable and marginalised. And today they say this, and I quote them: "Motivated by our Christian faith, we continue to offer local provision in over 700 centres throughout the UK to all who need them." A recent initiative has been To Your Credit, the Archbishop of Canterbury's task group on responsible credit and savings, launched in 2014. There's been a pilot in London and Liverpool. You might remember, Mr. Speaker, what the Archbishop of Canterbury had to say about Wonga when this all began. The pilot in London and Liverpool has engaged over 200 churches, trained 150 credit champions, is on target, I gather, to bring in 3,000 new credit union members. The planned 18-month rollout to 30 dioceses is aiming to benefit 2.5 million people. Next month is the first credit union month across the London diocese, and I welcome the initiative of the Archbishop of Canterbury to host a celebration of positive grassroots action, the faith communities at Lambeth Palace, in a couple of weeks' time, including a presentation from the Near Neighbours initiative of DCLG. Like the Honourable Member who spoke in starting this debate, I commend the initiative of the Cinnamon Network. What I think they're doing is identifying successful and effective initiatives being undertaken by a church in one area, and then encouraging the adoption of that idea on a sort of franchise model by congregations elsewhere. I also very much welcome the very important work of the Interfaith Network and its director, Harriet Crabtree. It's interesting, Mr. Speaker, to look at how all this is handled in other countries. In Germany, there is, I think, a formalised arrangement for the main Protestant and Catholic churches to deliver some welfare services on behalf of the state. In the USA, in 2009, President Obama set up a diverse advisory council for faith-based and neighbourhood partnerships, and he asked it to recommend how to strengthen the social partnerships between government and non-government providers, including how to strengthen their legal basis. That led to the publication at the end of March this year to Executive Order 13559 on fundamental principles and policy-making criteria for partnerships with faith-based and other neighbourhood organisations. It makes clear, rather as our covenant does, that faith-based organisations can participate in federally funded social service programmes on the same basis as any other organisation, and it specifies, for example, as a condition of direct federal assistance, that an organisation must not discriminate on the basis of religion, nor require a beneficiary to attend or participate in any explicitly religious practice. And there are other points along those lines set out. Now, that executive order is 304 pages long. It is a very different approach being taken in the USA to the very light touch voluntary covenant that our all-party parliamentary group is advocating. But I think looking at examples from other countries does strengthen the case for an initiative on the part of government in the UK. The Honourable Member for Congleton intervened a few minutes ago to draw attention to what the Oasis Trust has said. That is, it's a multi-academy trust. It's now one of the biggest school providers in the country. They launched the Oasis Foundation last week, which plans to carry out research in this area, publish reports, and as the Honourable Member for Congleton pointed out, their first report, Faith in Public Service, points out correctly that the covenant that I've been describing has only been taken up by about half a dozen local authorities so far, and it makes this call, which I commend to the Minister, that the government, under the auspices of the Office for Civil Society, and I'm delighted that my honourable friend who speaks on Office for Civil Society matters on behalf of the opposition is in her place, under the auspices of the Office for Civil Society should, and I quote, articulate a clear strategy for national and local engagement with faith organisations to include a number of things, and then sponsorship of the covenant developed by the APPG on faith and society, and further encouragement to local authorities to engage churches and church-based organisations in their commissioning decisions. So their proposal is that the government should sponsor the covenant. I welcome as well the endorsement for the covenant provided by the Commission on Religion and Belief in Public Life, chaired by Baroness Butler-Sloss in the other place, in its comprehensive and thoughtful report, Living with Difference, Community Diversity and the Common Good, published last December with the support of the Wolf Institute of Cambridge. So, Mr. Speaker, I want just to conclude by reading part of a newspaper article which appeared some time ago. It was written by Neil Lawson of the think tank Compass about the role of faith groups in our society. And actually, I won't quote much of the article, because quite a large amount of it was comprised criticism of people like me who were ministers in the last Labour government. But he went on to say this, which I do very much agree with. He said, they don't just talk, they do. Religious communities are among the increasingly few places that bring people together as citizens rather than as consumers, fighting for a living wage and against poverty. For me, as an atheist and a full-time politico, this is unsettling. I am a secularist and believe in the disestablishment of church and state in particular. He writes, I want to see the end of faith schools. And of course, religion has been the cause of terrible deeds, although none perhaps in recent years as abhorrent as those of atheists. But in words and deeds, in the world I see around me, he concludes, the positive role faith plays far outweighs the negative. And Mr. Speaker, I think that is going to be the view of a growing number of people, including, quite surprising, people like the author of that article, looking at what is happening in our society and looking at where we can find signs of optimism and hope and new ideas for changing things for the better in the future. So I hope, Mr. Speaker, that we will, in this debate, be able just to draw attention to the extraordinary scale and range and quality of the contributions being made to communities up and down the country by faith-based organisations, so that the Minister will be able to acknowledge that at the end of the debate as well. And also that he will consider the specific proposal made by the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Faith and Society, that the covenant should be signed in local communities by local councils on the one hand, faith-based organisations wanting to be commissioned by them on the other, to try and get over some of the barriers that hold back some of this activity at present.
Thank you. Mr. Jeremy Lefroy.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I congratulate my honourable friend from Congleton and the right honourable member from East Ham for securing this incredibly important debate on voluntary organisations and faith groups within them. But I think we shouldn't forget that there are also a tremendous number of people of faith who work within other voluntary organisations which are not specifically faith-based. So actually, the work of people of faith extends far and wide to an even greater extent than perhaps the organisations which we're talking about today, of course.
for allowing me to intervene so early on in the debate. But one excellent example from my own constituency is the Middlewich Clean Team. Over 200 people from the Middlewich community who go out and about. The Clean Team is there every weekend, keeping Middlewich clean and tidy. The members are welcome from all faiths and none. It was initiated by a lady who actually, in prayer, sought something meaningful she could do for her community.
I'm most grateful for that, and that's an example of something which I think probably every member will see in their own constituency. I don't want to run over all the things that have been mentioned in the excellent two speeches so far, but I just want to talk about a few organisations in my own constituency of Stafford and draw perhaps some conclusions from that about where we go forward, and perhaps seek some guidance from the Minister in this. In Stafford, as I would imagine in most constituencies, we have faith groups running nurseries. We have faith groups running youth work. I myself am involved a little bit in that, and it's something that gives me great pleasure, something a little bit outside the run of normal politics. We have the street pastors, as we have right across the country, and they do tremendous work. I've been out with them a couple of times and seen what they do in a very gentle way, supporting, counselling people on the street who are often in great distress. And this is not easy work. You're going out at 10 o'clock, often on a cold winter's night, maybe up till 2 or 3 in the morning. I have to say that usually I knock off earlier than the rest of the street pastors team do. I have great respect for their determination. We also have a children's bereavement charity, so important for children who've lost loved ones, which is run by people of faith. We have the Salvation Army, we have the Brethren. We also have international groups, which are voluntary organisations, faith-based voluntary organisations based in Stafford, the most notable of which I think is the Dalit Freedom Network, which seeks to work with organisations in India that particularly support Dalit people and their rights. And we have an organisation which started up a few years ago called the House of Bread. I had the honour of being the speaker at their fundraiser last week, and it was wonderful to see how many people were there, how many people they're involved with, the extent of their work. It started as a meal on a Wednesday evening, just inviting anybody who needed a hot meal to come in to what was then a building owned by one of my local Anglican churches. The Wednesday meal has then gone around the town in various buildings, Trinity Methodist Church, as well as St Mary's Church. It even spent a year and a bit in the Stafford Conservative Association Club, because we believed it was so important to give a home to this wonderful work. And they're now looking to secure their own premises, which I think is vital, because they're not just about providing a meal, providing food banks, but providing all sorts of support work for people with addictions, family support work as well. And I'd also like to talk a little bit about housing. This is an area where I think traditionally Christian organisations or faith-based organisations have been involved, but tended not to be for many years, and have now come back into it. But right throughout this time, we've had the YMCA across the country. In my own area, it's the YMCA of North Staffordshire, based in Stoke-on-Trent, but which covers Stafford Borough, which is doing tremendous work in providing a place, a home for young people, perhaps a bedsit, support, opportunities to work, opportunities into work, and now wants to help young people get out from, if you like, the bedsit into their own home that will be a flat or a small house in the community, and be able to stand on their own 2 feet. And I'd like to pay tribute particularly to the work of the YMCA North Staffordshire and its inspirational leader, Danny Flynn, who is a great friend of mine and who I think has done a tremendous amount for young people right throughout North Staffordshire, as have his whole team. That, just to show you how these organisations can grow, the number of staff has almost trebled in the last 5 or 6 years. They've managed to build nearly 100 units for young people at a time when funding has not been that easy. And I'd like to come back to that in a moment. And I'd also like to pay tribute to the organisations of other faiths which provide services within my own community, whether Sikh, Muslim or Hindu, particularly Hifsa Iqbal, who is somebody who is always there trying to work on behalf of people of all faiths and none from within her own community. There are 4 points that I would particularly like to raise. I'll start with funding, because funding is the one that is probably most raised. And what I believe we need here is funding arrangements that are not short-term. So when there is an arrangement either between the voluntary sector and the public sector, or maybe within the voluntary sector, or between the voluntary sector and the private sector, the key thing is consistency, a long-term approach, because the last thing you want is suddenly money to be made available and then just as quickly for it to be pulled and a service to be discontinued. It's almost harder and more heartbreaking to see a service stop suddenly and people left than it is not to start it in the first place. So, of course.
He's raising the critical issue of funding, and doesn't he also agree that more proactive help with bid writing offered by local authorities to faith-based organisations would be very helpful, because often navigating the thicket of complexity on these documents means that they're often dissuaded from even embarking upon it?
I totally agree with that, and I think we should be looking for projects or funding which is available for many years, even if it's at a lower level and starts in a modest way, rather than writing a big bid. The tendency is to say, let's bid for as much money as we can, and then perhaps we get the money, and the money is spent because it has to be spent within a fairly short period of time for accounting rules, public accounting rules, and then there's nothing. And there has been no provision made for continuation of that particular service, of course.
Do you agree, therefore, it would also be helpful if some of the national initiatives, like the Trussell Trust or Street Pastors or CAP, job clubs, perhaps if local authorities could agree a very simplified form of application which has been nationally accepted?
I'm always in favour of cutting red tape, as I know the Minister is, and simplification. But again, I would say let's look long-term. Let's not look for 1-2-year contracts, but 5-10-year programmes. Of course, there has to be quality assurance, and if a programme is going off track, then it needs to be looked at. One final point on funding that I would like to raise is the issue of the local housing allowance, particularly when it comes to housing support. And this is going to be a big... I know the government is looking very carefully at this at the moment, but it's going to be a very big issue if support, the cost of support, particularly for young people, but for vulnerable people of all ages, is included within the local housing allowance assessment, and therefore we see in effect that the contributions made can only cover rent and can't cover the cost of the support. And I believe that unless we sort this out, we will see quite a lot of programmes close in the coming years, because they cannot be run within the local housing allowance framework unless the support element is removed from that. The second area has already been addressed at some length and very well, which is about cooperation. I want to pay tribute to local authorities generally, certainly my own Stafford Borough, Staffordshire County Council, South Staffordshire District Council. They are never afraid to work together with faith organisations. They're very practical in this, and I would say that's both for the members, the elected members, and indeed for the officers. Of course, there can be some people who are a bit nervous about this, as the Right Honourable Member for East Ham has said. But in general, I found people to be very positive, and probably that has improved over the last 10 years since when I was in local government myself. Of course.
Does he perhaps think that the reluctance to engage comes more on the part of the faith-based organisations who have a misconception about how they will be received when they do so?
I think that's a very good point, and that may well be the case sometimes in faith-based organisations. We are a little bit reticent. We don't want to appear to be thrusting ourselves upon an unwilling local authority when actually in the local authority there is a great willingness to work together. A third area, I think, is training and support. We are talking about people giving up an awful lot of their time, and in some cases people who are really passionate about something but do need that training to be able to be most effective. And while not asking for large sums of money for training or support, what I do think we have to bear in mind is the need for, perhaps when there are programmes being put forward, that there is a training element always in there, because it's something that volunteers really appreciate. Often it's done within the programme. I mean, street pastors have excellent training programmes, as do most of these other organisations. But it needs to be there, because without training, people can soon feel out of their depth, feel a bit discouraged, and then they're no longer perhaps so willing or able to volunteer. And I think we have to consider that these programmes are not for the short term. It's often people giving up years, sometimes decades of their life. So they need refresher courses. They need to be supported in that, not just with initial training. And finally, as my honourable friend from Congleton has so eloquently put it, we need to allow these organisations to have space to be who they are. They are faith organisations. They have people who work within them have faith. They mustn't be afraid to show that faith in a way that is appropriate. We can't expect them to deny the source of their motivation. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very grateful for this opportunity to speak on this subject. I would ask the Minister if he could perhaps touch on some of the points that I've raised, but I would like to thank both members for bringing this forward, this such an important subject forward for discussion today.
Steve Double.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to also add my congratulations to the Honourable Member for Congleton and the Honourable Member for East Ham for securing this debate on such a very important subject, and it is a great pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for Stafford in this debate. And I want to make a contribution on a number of points, but first of all to state, as many honourable members present will know, that I have a great deal of experience in this regard. I was born into a family that really has devoted its life to Christian service and running a number of Christian charities and indeed churches, and that's been my experience for all of my life, and therefore I'm speaking today from that experience and from that background. And it's clearly no doubt that faith-based organisations play a very significant role in our local communities up and down our country. The vast majority of this is carried out by volunteers who freely give their time, their talent, their energy, their love, and very often their money for the good of other people. And as I said, they do that freely, they do that willingly. And, whether that's, as we've heard from many contributions already, the vast number of food banks that have sprung up and down our country and are meeting a very need in our communities, whether it's preschools or youth clubs that are being run by churches and other faith organisations who provide such vital services to families and to our young people, whether that's groups who provide meals and shelter to the homeless, to the elderly or to the lonely, working with ex-offenders, working with those suffering from addiction, or, as we've already heard, organisations such as street pastors who go out in our towns and cities at weekends and provide a very important service. They all provide vital services in supporting and serving some of the most vulnerable and needy people in our country. Back in 2014, a report was commissioned in Cornwall that sought to put a value on the amount of time that volunteers from churches and other faith-based organisations give within Cornwall. And that report came up with a figure of £20 million a year. That if you were to put a value on the time that volunteers gave from churches, it would amount to £20 million every year. And Cornwall is a relatively small, has a relatively small population, and I believe if that was reflected across the whole country, we would actually come up with a figure of several billion pounds a year that these volunteers contribute to our country. And let's also say that that was just measuring Christian and churches, and there are many other faith organisations who also contribute significantly to our communities up and down the country. So, we are talking about groups of people who make a very, very significant contribution to our society, and they should be respected for that. And I believe that it's clear that people of faith make that significant contribution across the country. But this is not a new trend. This has been going on in our national history throughout all of our history. And, our very nation has been shaped by great men and women of faith throughout our history who have stood up to be counted and broken new ground, whether that is Wilberforce in abolishing slavery, or Florence Nightingale and nursing injured soldiers, whether that's Reverend Chad Vara, who founded the Samaritans, or more recently the work of the street pastors. We have seen throughout our history it is people of faith who have brought change and reform to our society, and it is very much because of their faith that they have carried out the work that they do. And, of course, I'll give way.
Would you join with me in commending the work of Marriage Care, which currently provides relationship counselling and marriage preparation classes across local communities in England and Wales with 600 trained volunteers, and was actually founded 70 years ago after the war to support ex-servicemen and their families to rebuild their family relationships.
Thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and absolutely be happy to join her in congratulating. And I believe that one of the key areas that the Church and other faith groups can make a huge contribution to our society is in the area of supporting marriage and family in general, because I believe we recognise that family breakdown is the cause of many of the challenges and difficulties that our communities face. And the more that families can be supported, the better it will be for our communities. And I believe that the Church very much has a very important role to play in doing just that. And, I believe that the Church can be, and indeed should be, very proud of the contribution that it has made and that it continues to make to our society and to our local communities. Because it is often the Church and other faith-based groups that is best placed to meet and address the very real needs that our communities face. They are often very close to those communities. They are embedded in the communities. They're aware of the needs of that community from a place of involvement. They're often flexible and able to respond very quickly. We heard earlier in the debate about faith groups responding very quickly to crises such as flooding, and very often these organisations are very adaptable and can respond very quickly when a need arises. And also I believe that they're very practical. They go right to the point of need to meet the need rather than getting caught up in process and bureaucracy. They can see the need, respond quickly and practically meet the needs that people are facing. Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it's also pleasing that we have a Prime Minister who is not afraid to acknowledge the work of the Church and other faith groups in our country. Not only is it pleasing to hear him stand up in this House and declare that we are a Christian nation and that it is our Christian heritage and the values that our Christian heritage has given to our country that has made us the great country we indeed are, but also that he is actively supporting the work of the Church, other Christian organisations and indeed other faith groups in the absolutely vital work that they do. And I believe it's absolutely incredible in the 21st century that we have a Prime Minister who is not afraid to stand up and make statements like that. And I believe that we should be very thankful that we have someone who is prepared to do that. And it's quite refreshing in today's age when often the Church is increasingly being marginalised and finding that even in some quarters it's sneered at for the work that it does, that we have a Prime Minister who's willing to make such statements in this very chamber. Often Christians find themselves feeling that they need to play down their faith when they volunteer and carry out the work they do. And I believe that's deeply regrettable, because it is actually their faith that motivates them to do the things they do. And to find that they have to then apologise or in some way seek to play down the role their faith plays in the work they do, I think it is deeply concerning. Happy to give way.
Would you join me also in extending deep appreciation to Her Majesty the Queen, who has made it clear on a number of occasions during her Christmas broadcast that it is her own deep personal faith which has sustained and motivated her in her great sense of duty towards her citizens over so many decades.
Thanks, honourable friend, for that contribution, and absolutely I agree wholeheartedly with her that we have in Her Majesty the Queen a shining example of someone of deep faith and conviction who has given her whole life to the service of our country and is prepared to acknowledge and say that it is because of her faith that's one of the very reasons why she has been the person that we all love and respect, and we should be very grateful for that. And as I was saying, that we often find the place that Christians play in our society, indeed the church plays, as being eroded and undermined. And there is a growing feeling that the work of the church and its freedom to stand up for what it believes to be right and true is often under attack. I've stated in debates elsewhere in this House that I believe we have surrendered too much of our liberty in the name of equality, and that it is the Christian church that has often felt the brunt of this erosion of freedom of speech. And I believe we should never be afraid to make the connection between the excellent work that the church, Christian organisations, or indeed other faith groups carry out in our society, and the deep faith and conviction that actually motivates them to do the work that they do. And so, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would just like to put on record that I believe we should thank and show our great gratitude to the many, many thousands of men and women of faith in our country who work tirelessly and give of themselves for the good of others up and down our country in many of our communities. And it is right that today we show our thanks and appreciation for everything that they do. And also I believe that we should celebrate and value the work of the church that is done across this country, and we should not seek to restrict their freedoms to exercise their faith. Honourable members have already touched on the issue of the consultation and the proposal to force Sunday school and other church groups to register with Ofsted, and again I'm on record in this House of saying that I think this is a deeply regrettable move and something that I really hope the government will completely drop. We shouldn't be seeking to restrict further the work of the church. We should be seeking to do all we can to encourage it, support it and help it to do more of the excellent work that it does. And I therefore hope when the Minister comes to speak that he will clearly state that our country needs the church, needs faith organisations in the work they do, because often they carry out work that the state is not able to do, and often they carry out work that if they didn't do their work would place an even greater burden on the state and an even greater burden on public finances. And therefore there is a great need for the work that the church does, the work that faith groups do across the country, and we should be doing all we can to encourage them, to support them in the vital work they do. So I hope that we can give a very strong message from this chamber today that we are grateful for the work that men and women of faith do, and that we will do all we can to help, encourage and support them in what they do.
Turley.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd also like to join those who've thanked the Honourable Member for Congleton and the Honourable Member for East Ham for bringing today's debate on an issue of real importance. And if I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd also like to take a moment to place on record my thanks to the Backbench Business Committee. They provide a really important role in the democracy of this place and the ability of members to give voice to issues that may not be caught within the definition of urgent, which may not have the high profile or be raised on the Today programme, but which are nonetheless nonetheless really important to the fabric of our society and which deserve time and discussion in this place. And I think today's debate has been just such an example of an important issue like that. And we've heard some really interesting points raised and some very valuable experience from members around the House today. The Honourable Member for Congleton, I think, gave a real sense of the breadth of services and of support which is provided by faith communities right from cradle to grave. And I was very struck by some of the examples she gave, particularly around early intervention and groups that support people before they get into crisis and before the state has to intervene, often at great expense. They're there to prevent that. And just as the Honourable Member for St Austell and Newquay mentioned, they're actually saving the state money, they're doing things that the state just wouldn't be able to do, and that is a huge role that they provide. I also wanted to respond to the issue she raised in the context of Ofsted around extremism, but one which gives great concern to many civil society and faith groups, which is that some analysis in the Guardian newspaper showed that more than a quarter of the statutory investigations that were launched by the Charity Commission since 2012 have been directed at Muslim charities associated with running mosques, providing humanitarian relief, or undertaking aid effort in Syria. Now, absolutely, of course, we have to be extremely vigilant, and no one will want to see a single penny devoted to terrorism or to those forces that we're trying to tackle, both in this country and abroad. But our counter-terrorism strategy has to have support and integration and communication with civil society and with faith groups at the heart of it, and we mustn't alienate communities further. And I look forward to working with the Civil Society Minister and with the Charity Commission to ensure that we're not tipping the balance too far the other way. My honourable friend for East Ham raised some really interesting issues there. I was struck by, when he mentioned the Trussell Trust, how many faith groups are there in absolute times of crisis. And I think sometimes we take that for granted, that when the state has failed and when we fail in this place, it is often faith groups who are there to pick up the pieces. And I was also struck by the examples he gave of when multi-faith groups come together and what a powerful force they are, not just in their individual groups, but across the breadth of faith communities. We have a real source of energy and determination and commitment and passion to build a better society there. And, you know, I'm grateful for the examples he gave of where that is working. I'll come on to mention the covenant that the APPG has raised later on in my speech, but I give that my wholehearted support. I think it has huge potential for clarifying some of the misunderstandings and myths, and hopefully will play a role in supporting faith groups to deliver more services. The Honourable Member for Stafford mentioned some really important points as well that affect a lot of civil society groups, not just faith-based groups. The long-term security of funding, for example, we know is a huge issue, training and support, and the space to be who they are was something that particularly struck me. I think all of civil society wants to know that they play a different role. They're not just an arm or an agent of the state. They're here to do something which often our public services cannot do, to work, to respond quickly, to be flexible, to take risks. Sometimes we're not able to do that the public services aren't able to do that. And it's vital that civil society is able to respond to these problems and to react. And finally, the Honourable Member for St Austell and Newquay raised a lot of interesting points as well. I was struck by the 20 million value of church groups in Cornwall. What a huge contribution to local society and to British society around the country. And I join with him in paying tribute to all those volunteers who give up so much time and effort and money to contribute to our society. But I want to start my speech by sharing, as some other members have done, a celebration of the role of faith groups within civil society. Indeed, throughout our history, the role of faith itself, and of faith organisations in particular, have run through centuries of social progress that we've seen in this country. From before the Reformation, when religious duty meant that Christians undertook their 7 corporal works of mercy, like feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, visiting the prisoner, through the church parishes that administered the Elizabethan Poor Laws, to the work of the Victorian Quakers like Rowntree, who studied and worked to remedy destitution and the slums of the Industrial Revolution. And in recent years, as other members have pointed out, it was the energy and imagination of faith groups which drove the Make Poverty History campaign and which helped government's commitment to help to ensure government's commitment to international aid. And I'd also like to mention the London Citizens, as my honourable friend has done, a multi-faith organisation who have done so much to shape and drive the debate around the living wage and have made a real difference to people's lives. And today we see many faith-based humanitarian groups saving lives and bringing aid and succour in some of the darkest and most desperate parts of the world. Faith has driven much of the social progress of British society, and faith organisations continue to be a source of energy, new ideas and passion in civic society today. A recent Demos publication that my honourable friend from East Ham mentioned found that religious people are more likely than non-religious people to volunteer regularly in their local community and to feel a greater sense of belonging. They also feel they can influence decisions locally and nationally and are more likely to take decision-making roles, such as being a councillor, a school governor or a magistrate. In my own constituency, I see fantastic work undertaken by local faith groups every single day. Footprints in the Community is a faith-based group linked to the Trussell Trust, which runs our local food banks in Redcar, and they also run what they call a men's shed, which is a workshop space for men to meet, to learn new skills and to tackle issues of social isolation. Our local mosque in South Bank is so much more than a place of worship. It's a community hub, a resource centre which helps people to learn English, to get into work, to get help and advice, and tackle problems like social isolation. We also have the Redcar Beacons, Street Angels, as other members have raised today, who help people on a Friday and Saturday night in the centre of town. And I know from my own experience the role that Christians in poverty have played in my local area in tackling those who are struggling with debt and financial exclusion. Yet, as has been explored today, many faith groups still feel there is a reluctance by local authorities and others to commission services from faith-based providers. And conversely, there are still many local authorities and commissioners who have important concerns which cannot be ignored, but over the use of public funds to support faith-based services. And it's vital that we try to tackle some of the misconceptions that surround this. There can be perceptions that potential users could be excluded on grounds such as religious belief, or that support is founded on outdated views of faith-based morality. Yet Dr. Sarah Johnson's in-depth study at the University of York in 2009 concluded that there was no evidence that faith-based organisations used public funds to propagate religion or exclude potential users on grounds such as religious belief or sexual orientation. The coming decade will see this country facing new social needs and tough new demographic and economic challenges. There will be fresh demands on public health, on social care, on education, employment support and on community inclusion. And these challenges will require new resources. We need to unlock the potential of every part of our society to contribute towards these solutions, and faith groups are going to be a vital part of that. Of course.
As the Honourable Member says, faith groups are and will increasingly play an important role in promoting community cohesion. Do you think that both local and national government should do more to ensure, reach out to faith groups to help them fulfil the potential of their role in this respect?
I think the Honourable Lady is absolutely right, and they're going to play, I think, an increasingly important role, not just in the way that we deliver services, but you raise the point of community cohesion. We know we have challenges in our society of integration, of understanding, of myths, and so on. And for me, community groups are right on the front line of those communities and are able to bridge these divides and break down these myths and boundaries. And I would wholeheartedly support both local and central government in taking steps to build on that. The big society had all its promise of unleashing great civic power, but has turned out to be, for many, many groups, a bit of a damp squib. And many faith groups find themselves now in a situation, instead of benefiting from a huge unleashing of opportunity, are in fact simply now picking up the consequences of failure, of policy failure and desperation and crisis, as we've seen in the situation with the food banks. I would like to see faith-based organisations being seen as an important resource throughout the delivery of public services if they're supported to work constructively and effectively as part of civil society. That will mean ensuring that local authorities are confident in commissioning services from them, transferring assets to them, and particularly working with appropriately qualified faith-based organisations, and making sure that local authorities include faith groups when they look for solutions to local social needs. I'd like to recognise at this point the work of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Faith and Society in demonstrating that faith groups have a great deal to offer as providers and as advocates for the communities in which they serve, and that at the moment some of their potential is unnecessarily being overlooked. To that end, I welcome the covenant that the group has established, in which my honourable friend explained in such detail. I believe this could be adopted by faith groups and local authorities in cities across the UK, and I'd like to see it more widely propagated. This covenant could go a long way to break down myths, provide confidence, and by establishing agreed frameworks, build a relationship of trust and of practical support. We politicians, whatever our religious beliefs or none, do well to remember that we do not have a monopoly on the social conscience of this country, nor on social action. That is why the support of and respect for civic society is so important and must remain at the heart of this government's vision for public services and social change. And so finally, I'd like to welcome this debate today, on today of all days, when I sincerely hope with all my heart that we will be celebrating having the first ever Muslim mayor of our capital city of London, sending out a message to people around the world that our society in Britain is a place of openness, decency, tolerance, and where your love of your community and your city, your commitment to others and to public services and to social good are what define you, where faith is a source of positive energy and not something to be perverted as a smear. I sincerely hope today's election result shows us the spirit of this debate, that hope and unity will triumph over division in British politics and civil society.
Minister James Wharton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. What a fascinating debate and discussion it has been. It has touched on areas of government policy across many departments. It has touched on the experiences that so many honourable and right honourable members have had in their constituencies. It has touched upon so much of the great work that those of different faiths in our society do for the communities which we are all here to represent. Faith, Madam Deputy Speaker, is a deeply personal and individual thing. It can be the thing that inspires us when we go to strive, to achieve, to do more, to change the world and the circumstances around us. It can be the thing that consoles us when we're at our lowest ebb. It is something that is interwoven in the history of our great country and throughout our society. It is something which clearly has inspired many of the comments of honourable members in the debate here today, a debate which I welcome for its importance and its relevance to so much of that which is happening around us. We have a Prime Minister who, quite rightly, has praised the role and the importance of faith in our society. We have members of Parliament across the party political divide who recognise the different aspects and the different ways in which faith contributes to that which we all want to achieve, a better and more successful society, community and country. We have faith organisations which represent a huge part of our charitable and voluntary sector. There are nearly 50,000 faith-based charities. 27% of those charities registered in this country are faith-based, from small groups to large organisations like the Salvation Army, which has been mentioned more than once in the debates and comments today, which for around 150 years has made a real contribution to our society. Faith, Madam Deputy Speaker, also makes a contribution to our policy and policy development. I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Congleton, for her work in this area and in helping to secure this debate with the honourable member, right honourable member for East Ham. She spoke of the range of charities and organisations which work in this area and that which they do. Street pastors, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have the street pastors in Stockton, and I went out when first elected and have been out since with Stockton street pastors, and I saw the great work that they do in my local high street, helping people when they need that little bit of extra support, calming people when they are scared or frustrated or frightened. Indeed, I remember that night vividly as at around 2 o'clock in the morning we approached one young lady who was somewhat worse for wear, I think tired and emotional is the appropriate jargon to use in this particular context. And she gladly took the support, the bottle of water, the flip-flops, the welcoming arm around her shoulder that the street pastors gave to her. She looked at me and said, you look like that Tory. And I said, oh, don't worry about that now, we're here to help. And that is what this government is about, that is what these organisations are about. It's not about party politics, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's about assisting people in our society to make it a better place. My honourable friend, the member for Congleton, also spoke about the work that's done in human trafficking, in campaigning on that incredibly important issue, in literacy, in youth work, in keeping Middlewich clean. These things all contribute at different levels and in different ways, but they all matter, and they speak to the great work that so many people in our society do, inspired by the faith that drives them to do it. She inspired, indeed, the honourable member for Shipley to intervene and comment on his experience of the flooding in his constituency, when I know from my visit to his constituency and across the north of England when we experienced those devastating floods over Christmas and the New Year, that it was often the Christian organisations, but also, in the specific example my honourable friend gave, the mosques in Bradford that stepped forward, were most quick to organise, were most effective in the support that they gave. It was the churches that opened their doors to those who'd lost access to their homes because of the impact of the devastating weather that we saw across much of the north of England, and it was the churches and the other faith and community-based religious organisations that were there to help people when they needed it most. My right honourable friend, the member for Chelmsford, called them unsung heroes. Well, in the debate today, Madam Deputy Speaker, they have not been unsung. Many of them have been recognised, but there are many more, and indeed there are so many doing so much that we would not have time today, this afternoon, to comment on them all. My honourable friend, the member for Congleton, also spoke about local government, and she raised the genuine and legitimate concerns that she has about the way in which local government engages with faith-based organisations that want to do good work in our communities. That sometimes there is that fear or that lack of understanding which can prevent good things being done for the communities that local government is there to serve. I'm a minister in the Department for Communities and Local Government, Madam Deputy Speaker, and so this resonated particularly with me. It's an issue I would, of course, be happy to discuss further with my honourable friend. We want to ensure that where a positive contribution can be made, we do everything we can to facilitate it. My honourable friend also raised the issue of Ofsted and Ofsted inspections. I listened very carefully to what she had to say. The Prime Minister and the Secretary of State for Education have been clear that the registration of out-of-school settings will not apply to organisations such as Sunday schools. We're not proposing to regulate institutions such as Sunday schools which teach children for only a short period every week. We have to ensure that organisations do the right thing, meet the standards that we should expect of them, but my honourable friend raised legitimate concerns. They're concerns to which I have listened and of which I am aware, and I'm sure that they will be drawn to the attention of the Secretary of State for Education following this debate today. And indeed, I will do that, but I know that my honourable friend will take the time to, as I'm sure she already has as well. The Right Honourable Member for East Ham, and I congratulate him on his work for the all-party group on faith and society and the incredible contribution that makes to informing us in this place of the breadth of work that is done out there in the communities that we all represent by faith-based organisations. Spoke of faith-based social activism, the difference that it can make. He gave specific examples of where organisations inspired by their faith were leading debate that ultimately changes policy in this place, that ultimately convinces those who have, by virtue of our democratic process, the opportunity to effect political change, that the issues on which they advocate are the right ones to be supported. He spoke as well of the covenant that the all-party group is supporting. The development of the faith covenant by the all-party parliamentary group on faith and society is a welcome development. We want to see that engagement between the delivery of government service, including particularly at local government level, following the comments from my honourable friend, the member for Congleton, done in the way that gets the maximum benefit for all those who rely on those services, and this covenant is a welcome contribution to that discussion. Of course, I'll give way to the right honourable member.
To him, and I'm grateful for the points that he's making. I wonder whether he would reflect on the proposal made by the Oasis Trust that the covenant should be sponsored by government, that government should help to spread the covenant amongst local authorities up and down the country.
I think certainly anything that appropriately raises the profile of the work that's done in the engagement and the approach that is needed is welcome. I will indeed reflect on the comments that he has made, and I'm sure by the debate we're having right now, right here, we're helping to raise the profile of what is an important issue, but I recognise the additional work that he would like to see done in this area. My honourable friend, the member for Stafford, spoke of the range of charities in his constituencies and the great work that they are doing across faiths, across the communities that are served, the work done, even including use of the Conservative Association headquarters, an innovative step which I welcome, but which is making a real difference to the lives of people in Stafford. He spoke about the need both for funding but also for funding consistency, an important message, I think, and one again which reaches across the departments of government and local government and the arms of the state which commission services, but sends an important message to them about what is needed by those voluntary organisations which by their very nature, their voluntary nature, by the way in which they come about, are often more effective than any deliberately centrally designed arm of government is likely to be able to be. The challenge that exists there, Madam Deputy Speaker, in ensuring that public money is properly protected and accounted for, but balancing that against the need to retain what makes those very organisations special is an important one, and giving them the consistency and the certainty so that they need to engage with those funding streams and to get the best from them is an important matter, which I'm pleased my honourable friend has raised. I will certainly take into account his comments, and I know that my honourable friend, the Minister for Civil Society, will be very interested to hear what he has to say and is very engaged in this particular issue. He also spoke of the value of training and the processes that we need to ensure that when these programmes exist, people continue to be trained and retrained, that we continue to ensure that people are able to get the best out of the good things that they want to do. I think his comments are very welcome and very pertinent, and they're ones again that will resonate across government and in the discussions that I know he is having with ministers on an ongoing basis. My honourable friend, the member for St Austell and Newquay, gave a powerful speech about the importance of faith in public life. He spoke of his experience, considerable experience, highlighting the historic context of that contribution and what it has done to build the society in which we live today. He also gave the very specific example of that assessment that was made of the value that Christian volunteers in Cornwall made to the society there and the communities of Cornwall. That £20 million a year, not including all of the other faiths and other groups that do great work, the Christian community voluntary work alone in 1 year, £20 million in Cornwall, and he was quite right, Madam Deputy Speaker, to observe that if you multiply that up across the country, the numbers become very significant indeed and make a real contribution to our society. The quick and practical response of faith organisations is often unparalleled. It is often when, as we had discussed with flooding, as we discussed with disasters that occur of whatever type and in whatever part of the world, those faith-driven communities that are sufficiently fleet of foot, that are motivated in the right way, that are quick enough to act, that are engaged and connected properly to ensure that help gets to those who need it most quickly. Government tries always to be quick to respond to the challenges that emerge, but it is not always the first responder, the first on the scene, the most appropriate to be the quickest to help where it is needed. Faith organisations often are fulfilling that role, and the work that they do in that area is incredibly important. I am pleased my honourable friend raised it and put it on the record. He also challenged me in my comments to state on behalf of the government the recognition of the importance that faith the contribution that faith makes to our society and to what we do. I hope in the comments I've already made I've been clear about the position as government views it and the support government has for faith organisations, but I will restate it for the avoidance of any doubt. Just like the Prime Minister, just like so many honourable members who have spoken here today, I recognise and the government absolutely recognises the important contribution that faith makes to our society, the incredible value it adds to our country, and my honourable friend was quite right to raise it and quite right to ask for it to be reiterated onto the record, Madam Deputy Speaker, because it is important for us all and for the communities that we represent. The Shadow Minister, following the debate and discussion, touched on many of the comments the honourable members had made. She also raised a specific point about the Charity Commission and the work the Charity Commission does to regulate this area. The Charity Commission does a difficult job, Madam Deputy Speaker. It deals with a range of organisations. It has to ensure that those who might abuse the freedoms that we quite rightly give charitable organisations and the support as a state that we offer to them for purposes which are not charitable. And it has to work hard to get that balance right. Where there are concerns, the Shadow Minister is absolutely right. We should look into them and we should ensure that the job is being done in the way that it appropriately should be. At the same time, the Charity Commission must be free to make investigations where it is appropriate that it does so, but it must also be accountable for the decisions that it makes in the investigations that it carries out. And I welcome the comments of the Shadow Minister about the need to get the balance right, the sort of investigations and the sort of organisations that are chosen for investigation, to ensure that every community and every faith, the depth of the contribution of which we have touched on in the comments from honourable members here today, feel that they can engage fully with the freedoms that exist and the opportunities that are there to contribute to our society. Madam Deputy Speaker, it has been a positive debate, an informative and a well-informed debate. It has shown and highlighted, without any doubt, the breadth of the work that faith and charity organisations do, touching on many areas of government policy, touching on many areas of support in our society, drawing on examples from right across our great country. The charitable sector is a great and wonderful thing. It's one of the things that we should be proud of and that makes this country great, Madam Deputy Speaker. A large part of the charitable sector is supported by those motivated by their true and deeply held faith and convictions to be part of it. That is to be welcomed, that is to be encouraged. And I think the comments from honourable members in the debate that we have had today will underline the importance of and the significance that we in this place on the work that they do.
Fiona Bruce.
And thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Minister for his wholehearted and heartfelt support in applauding the work of so many organisations of faith which have been referred to in this debate. And can I thank also all members who've joined in this debate and join them in similarly applauding the work of the organisations they've referred to. Can I also thank the Minister for his offer to meet, because there are actually 4 issues that he didn't particularly touch on in his response, because, and I accept that the content of this debate does indeed range over a number of departments. So perhaps he could write to me in response to a point I raised earlier about how central government can help and work with local authorities to promote religious literacy across our communities and in turn to promote community cohesion. Secondly, how can our government explore the concept of reasonable accommodation? This is something which other countries have looked at. It would be helpful for us to look at that in this country too. Thirdly, it may have come as a surprise to him to hear that the top concern in terms of policies on the part of evangelical Christians is that policies promote liberty and freedom of expression. And I wonder if that's something which he could also look at, because it is a very, very considerable concern and is to an extent having what is in some places called a chilling effect on free speech on the part of people of faith, something I'm sure the government wants to deter. And then finally, I would appreciate it if he would let us have a written response to the concerns I expressed in the last part of my speech and others touched on about the out-of-school settings proposals, because the consultation was held many months ago and tens of thousands of people across the country are awaiting a government response as a result of the contributions which they spent a long time submitting to that consultation. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it.